So welcome to my show, Underworld Party.
Woot woot.
And you can. I'll introduce you in a second, but I just want to tell you how this show works. Um, so I will talk and you will listen, and then you will talk and I will listen,
Oh my
and that's
gosh,
pretty much
this
how
this is
it
challenging.
works. Yeah. So it just how it goes.
Already more than what happens at my workplace. So
Yeah,
this is
yeah. We'll just Hmm. Hmm.
hmm, hmm, hmm,
To be
hmm.
named or not be named.
Yes,
That is
hmm.
the question. Yes.
Easy to find.
Yes.
With
Well,
the Googles.
I had this funny idea that y'all should like introduce each other, but also maybe if you're not up for that, that's totally fine. But I would just like to say, you're two of my favorite people. I haven't seen you in person in a long time. I've got this San Francisco background, this virtual reality San Francisco happening because that's where we all met. And I thought, well, that would be a funny little
It's lovely.
reminder. Um, and um, we met doing the clown form that I often talk about that probably nobody outside of certain circles can understands, Bouffon.
Yeah,
And it is a kind of clown. And I'm always talking about it because I think that it's one of the best theatrical forms I've ever come across. And y'all were my teachers and co-conspirators and colleagues and playmates, and it was one of the highlights of my time on this earth.
oh my god, oh my
And
god,
it
oh my
really was.
gosh, that's awesome.
And we've all been through a pandemic, and the pandemic is still happening, even though officially it's somehow gone. And we've all been sort of making work and not making work through this pandemic. And I really just wanted to have a chit chat about it all and about how the work works or doesn't work in today's climate, because it's a very different climate than when we all trained together, right? It's like
It is.
the social climate is
It's
different.
intensely different. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Sabrina, would you like to introduce yourself or introduce Natty or give a little chewy bits, so we can
Ooh,
locate
morsels.
you.
Oh, oh, that guy? I guess I could just speak for myself. Um, yeah, I'm a theater artist, I think, still. I've been doing Bouffon since I guess slightly before Dare. At that time was a good time to be like, let's get some monthly shows going. I felt like I was always kind of prodding Natty to be like, let's do it. Let's just go for it. Let's do these things. Let's go to Piano Fight. Let's have a thing going on. Let's be part of this like theater, underground indie theater stuff that was happening in San Francisco was very vibrant at that time as well. So I've been part of that since after I went to Del Arte, which was I graduated 2012 and then came to the Bay and kind of immediately wanted to start doing Bouffon just based on what I had heard. And I've been doing it to this day, did a solo show, but co-created by me and Natty during the pandemic, which I believe we'll be speaking on.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely be speaking
Uh,
about that.
so that's kind of my background. At this time, I've been doing a lot more just surviving in the Bay, so a lot less theater that isn't like my own little solo things at this time. So I do miss that time of all of us being there and creating a lot of really good communal work. And I think that that's really, yeah, like it was nourishing and also a really great way to do Bouffon with like a group of people. I find it so much more challenging as a solo practitioner.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that too because of the pedagogy of the way Natty taught it. I want to get into sort of like some of the things I think that Naked Empire did that I still don't see very often sort of in the world, which is very fascinating to me how unique and sort of precious it all seems to be in hindsight. In foresight, I was just like, yeah, sure, whatever. But in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that was maybe something's there. Okay, thank you, Sabrina. Natty, go.
Okay. I like the Bossy Dare. That's So, um, um, I am Natty. It's short for Nathaniel. I like this phrase Cali Rican because it does get the diaspora vibe, but and also my allegiance to, and I don't know, so much of my who I am is Californian. I lived there from my birth till I was 38. So that's a minute, you know. I'm in Boston now as a professor. Um, and I started Naked Empire Bouffon Company in 2009. Up to that time, I've been an actor all my life. I was in a play every year of my life since the fourth grade. So I've been an actor forever and ever. It's my passion and joy. And then I went and got an undergraduate degree in it. I went to Los Angeles, part of a experimental company, founder of a Shakespeare company, co-founder, or founding member, whatever they call it. And then I went to grad school for physical theater at Dell'Arte International, the same alma mater as Sabrina. And I did the MFA program there. And in the second year, Giovanni Fusetti came through. He is a teacher, pedagogue, he calls himself. Uh, with a designation from or certification or some kind of formal linkage to Lecoq and Lecoq's pedagogy. This is Jacques Lecoq's work, and has been teaching his version of Lecoq's work all over the world and started a couple of schools, and he's currently in Italy. He came through Dell'Arte in the spring of 2005, 2007. And he does a lecture demonstration on the first day of a study, and we did it for 5 weeks or 4 or 5 weeks, intensive, you know. And on that first day, did the lecture demo, and I tell you, it was like Romeo and Juliet style falling in love with everything that was coming out of his mouth about what the form is, how it can be, what it can do, what it asks of the performer, what it asks of the audience, what it asks of society. I was like, this is instantly, I was like, this is my life's work. And I haven't let it go since. I've been obsessed. Moved to San Francisco in 2008, started my company in 2009, and we've been making work. And then we got into this one festival in Canada in 2013, and that started the Canadian sort of circuit journey for the Fringe festivals and other invited festivals. And I started teaching my intensive, which you both took, and we got to create community through that in San Francisco. I started those in 2010, and I'm still teaching them. Going to be teaching one in Calgary in a week. And it's my life's fucking joy. I love it. And I can't wait to talk about the details.
Oh, yay. Okay, so I want to sort of jump into it. So, like, Giovanni aside, which I love, I'll probably do a separate podcast on Giovanni because, real quick, when I moved back up to Portland after I sort of said goodbye to the Bay, this was probably like 6 years ago now or something. Time gets a bit wobbly, but basically, at completely random, did not know what was going on. Giovanni was doing a double weekend lecture thesis project demonstration at Process Work, which is this like kind of avant Euro shamanistic therapy model up here. It's very like, is this appropriative? Yes. Is it also kind of like really important and famous? Yeah, probably also yes. But basically, he was graduating from their like 5 million year program or something. And so he did 2 weekends, and it was very weird because I was like, am I in a weird dream? Like I just came from there, and like this guy's teaching, but like he's not framing it as Bouffon, but like it's totally Bouffon. So I got this rare workshop experience with him over the course of 2 weekends, 4 days, full days. And it was like some crazy, like it was either free or donation based. It was stupid. It was like, okay, I'm supposed to be here right now. I really understood that.
Yeah.
And so I got the kind of dose there, but the dose that I got was very interesting too, because he was weaving in all of this like therapeutic kind of reality. He was actually trying to talk about how this work is essentially a form of like disregarded therapeutics, you know, in some way. And he was, you know, sort of piecing that together. And that's kind of the route that I was going for too, because after I left, you know, Bouffon and San Francisco, I was like, there's something here that weaves together a bunch of things already that from my studies of cultural anthropology, trauma healing, you know, medicine ceremonies, it already has a bunch of things. They just call it something different. So I was already sort of looking at like, what would it be like if Bouffon was more explicitly about sort of like dealing with some things? This is a little bit more like psychodrama.
Yeah.
And so I had this workshop with Giovanni and I was like, okay, so if he's on this track and I'm behind him, then we're both on the right track and we kind of have to go and figure it out, right? We have to go and like, I have to go and like live a life and like really integrate these ideas, right? And so that's what I've been doing. And my version of Bouffon, I call it deathclown because integrates it integrates all of the sickness, the disability stuff that I have. It integrates all of the non-dual tantra and animism and like kind of Eastern studies work that I've done. And but it still is about this delightfulness. And that's sort of what I want to talk about is sort of like there was the Bouffon that sort of infected all of us at a certain point in time, way in the long years of our youth. But then it sort of colonizes us in like the cordyceps in The Last of Us. And so now we probably have a slightly different idea of Bouffon now after doing it for many years, right? So there's the initial love, like Natty was like, this is it. But then there's
Yeah.
the now of like maybe a little more sober, a little more cynical, a little more mature, and still going, yeah, this work is still the thing, but how I relate to the work is slightly different. So I'd like to open up a conversation about this sort of like, you know, the love affair when I was a small baby theater person, and now like how am I relating to it now?
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to sort of open that up in whatever popcorny way, you know, is interesting
Yeah.
for either of you.
To either of us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think like yeah, I always was like drawn into or like something that I was seeking ever because I was like I don't know, I went from like doing dance to musical theater to clown and was at UC Berkeley and then was like, I need to go to Del Arte, which is like such a weird jump for so many things in a certain way, but I just was like, there's always something to be learned from the body. And I just think that like being in person in these kinds of like break the fourth wall kinds of things just like spoke to me as an audience member. And I was like, oh, this kind of anytime I watch this kind of thing, I am engaged, I am intrigued, I am in the story, I am immersed. What is it about this? What's happening here? And coming to Del Arte, so many things became clear to me about like why this work is so important of, you know, telling these kinds of stories and especially like coming at it from like being a woman as well and being like, hey, you can be cast as a certain kind of woman character and that's all you get as an actor and to like feel everything be so expansive and then like in dance being like there's just all women it's usually you know so then I'm like what is this like weird place where there's nothing that I can write and I also loved politics I loved being steeped in politics and like the intellectual world of UC Berkeley I was like I just want to learn everything I want to be at the library I want to be reading things I want to be watching things
Right.
and and a lot of the things that I loved were like political dramas and being like this is real life and like politics is dramatic and it's things that matter to me and that like affect me so then like I didn't necessarily think Bouffon would be the vehicle for that in ways that I wasn't anticipating to like where we are I think Natty is like a company as well where we kind of like are for Naked Empire is like social justice forward. I just never thought that that would be the trajectory of like putting these ideas together for myself. But I think it's been incredible to be able to like create the kind of work that I want to be creating, that I think is of the moment and topical and needed and necessary, and also do it in this way that is engaging for the audience, that people are drawn in, that we're having what feels more like a dialogue with folks, and also through like satire being able to bring these things forward.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of as a like just having these like little imprints, almost like when I was younger, to like, oh, I like this, I don't know why, what's going on, to being at this place of being like, I'm working with Naked Empire because like we want to do these things towards creating dialogue around social justice and causes that are important to the world, and that we can do that through comedy, we can do that through having fun, and not losing sight of like what is fun, what is bringing people to the theater, what is this magical moment that we can all share together. So
Right.
that's a little bit for me on that journey.
Yeah.
And you brought up a few things that I like. For me, the body of the clown or the body of the Bouffon is like this cauldron that everything can be inside of at the same time. And I think, we'll talk about Baba Yaga a little bit too, which is like, because I do think the Bouffon is kind of like this meta folkloric kind of archetypal character. It's like an archetype that actually like eats other archetypes or something. It's like a very interesting kind of meta model of the body, right? And the psyche and the soul. And the fact that like it's not like, don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed a great many red-nosed clown theater pieces, a great many. They have a lot of freshness, whimsy, innocence, vulnerability, even some complicity. Like there is this exchange with the audience that is so needed, I think. It's like not like passive consumerism. It's really like, you can feel the texture between the performers and the stage and the audience and the sort of the seats, right? You can feel this. But to me, as like a person who's mixed race, a person who's queer, a person who's been systematically like impoverished, and it was always like this kind of fairy tale version of like futility, right? It's like, oh, the clown is so sad because they're poor. And it's like, yeah, this isn't poor though. Like this is like a kind of whitewashed kind of poverty. Like this is kind of like, oh, look, it's Charlie Chaplin again, little tiny hobo eating potatoes. It's like there's a way that it's become, I think, sanitized. And for me, Bouffon was the desanitization of all of that. Like it was just like, oh, let's just unclean it a bit. Like, oh yeah, it's all cleaned up in Red Nose Clown. Well, what if we didn't do that? And what if we actually like didn't just do a show that was based on a show that was a 50-year-old show or something, like these kinds of tropes? Like what if we totally updated it for the moment that we're actually in, the anxiety we're actually in? So you spoke to a bit of that, and I think it's fascinating that like, I kind of came from dance too, where it's like, yes, the body, the body, the body, but then they're not necessarily telling you to speak your mind, right? In dance, you have to like do a different way, and it's like, why can't I just use all of me at once? Why can't I just like do the pretty thing, the beautiful thing, but also then like say like biting dialogue about, abortion or something? Like why is there this stratification? And so once I, was introduced to an art form that actually like explicitly was like, oh no, we use everything. No, everything's on the table. The meat cleaver's on the table, like everything's on the table. It's like, oh, the nasty stuff too. It's like, yes, all that stuff's on the table, right?
I'm really resonating with what you're saying, but what both of you are saying. You're reminding me, when it comes to the desanitized or unsanitized version, that for a long time, and still, like, I would love to, like, I don't know, see this. The aesthetic, the sort of marketing aesthetic that I wanted for Naked Empire was this notion of a borer, things that create tunnels and subways. The idea of going into the earth and unearthing and coming from this, and it's very dirty, but it's very earthy, but it also smells like both fresh and nasty, and also like right and fertile and of the stuff that we're all of anyway. Um, as Alan Watts says, this planet is peopling. It creates. It's just sprouting life, and the Bouffons come from it. Um, that's really rich to me. It also is this profound um, reminder to myself or practice of the unity of us. So that is, we're all returning or part of this earthy thing. And one of the things about Buffon conceptually, the theory, is that they're not, there's, according to Giovanni and according to a lot of the pedagogy, they don't judge. They're all down there in the muck, like we're all fucking messes. Like, let's fucking, why are you like acting like you can't be seen? We can't see it. You're a fucking mess. Come on, come on, let's make a game out of it. Obviously, you love it. You humans do it all the fucking time. So don't stop judging and at least talk about the thing, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but to go back to your question around like the arc of change since we were baby creators to now, one of the things I'm hearing from y'all and I'm realizing is both a resonant and also parallel track to the form and then to now is that I all my life um, was never attracted to the lyrics or the intellectual aspects of art. It's about feeling and saturation and color and juice, the impact on my body. So I love a Rothko painting. I love a Kandinsky painting. I love dance music. I love soul music and belting. I love saturated color. I love that I went to see a Broadway show once. My favorite written play, a straight play, is Edward Albee's The Goat because I cried for like 3/4 of it. I was bawling because I'm like, you're tearing me apart. It's my soul. I loved it. I love all that shit. And so that it gets churned. It's another good like verb for Buffon, the dynamic of Buffon, because it gets churned by Buffon. My soul gets churned by it because they uh, they practice a profound sense of belonging, and belonging really belong and always belong requires a really robust subversion or non-existence of shame, and shame is a barrier to belonging. So they fucking are shameless, celebratory, um, not shaming you and all, but also but seeing you and like let's play with it. That they talk about it or bring it up so much that it lessens any of the power that it might have in sort of normal, whatever, pedestrian society in the audience, and possibly creates an entryway for all of us to sort of like, maybe we can all sort of talk about the thing. Look at them. So there's that vibe. And of course, I want to try to be in the practice of being unapologetic and being my full self, yada, yada, yada. And the problem, some of the pitfalls in the early days was what a friend, a scholar who writes about embodiment a lot, asked me. He's a friend, and he says, I really, really love you and respect your work. I just wonder, from all these photos and what I've seen about your work, how is it not a kind of minstrelsy of obesity and disability? And I didn't have a good answer. I knew the intentions and I knew where my heart was, but it taught me in that question the difference between intention and impact. Nobody has ever come up to me as a student or as an audience member and said, hey, I'm really hurt by what you're mocking. But I know that there's a power dynamic there, and so it's possible. It's quite possible we've done harm, and so over the years, we're trying to step away from that practice of using fatness and jiggle and disability. There's a lot of pedagogy that's around amputees and teeth that are missing, etc. And that we laugh at that. It's an entryway. And yet I still think about it as since I am into the theatrical thing. There's folks in the Eastern Canada, like Montreal, Toronto, who do something called neo Bouffon. They thought that Bouffon is on the inside, the psychology, but not on the outside. Look like just a realism type entity, and I'm still not interested in that. I want wild, theatrical, full visual awesomeness. Let's fucking demolish a space.
Right.
And so now we're asking, how can we be visually, physically arresting without leaning into that kind of minstrelsy that can do harm? And so that's the toggle and the journey that we're currently on.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm right on board with it too, because like I think there's enough, like there's more than enough ableism in theater for everyone to have some, like
Mhm.
there's so much. You just eat it for, it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like sometimes when you go to like, okay, so we're going to be totally disability justice, and we have this idea of what disability justice looks like, which is to not offend anybody in all of these 10,000 ways. Suddenly you have a different kind of sanitized theater that actually doesn't do the thing. It doesn't like get at
Yep, I hear
anything.
that. I hear that.
And like for me, I often think about like because being in San Francisco for a long time, you're just surrounded by the most amazing drag performers. You're just surrounded by, and you have drag performers of all kinds, like where their costume and their wig and their makeup are just, is how much did that cost? It's so amazing. And then you have the other side, which is like, oh no, honey, I threw this together. It's a garbage bags. It's like recycled trash. And
Yeah.
it's like, right. So if drag can hold all of that and more, which
Yep.
includes like the kind of like not fully dressed drag, where there's a kind of deconstruction and a kind of collapsing of the character, right? Like the disheveled, like the collapsing of the drag persona is like part of the show sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Like if you have this whole arc of like, I'm a perfect, look at this perfect and amazing hologram that I am, going all the way down to like, fake blood snorting coke on the floor, like,
Right.
I'd watch the
just
hell out of that show. I'd love that show.
yeah.
Shit.
And I've seen shows like that. I've seen
Yeah.
the gamut in San Francisco. And I think that
Right.
like in some ways that prepared me to sort of understand Bouffon in a better way. And then also, delving into my, mixed race heritage and my sickness and actually going, wow, so like everyone's kind of ableist without knowing it, and everyone's kind of racist without knowing it. It's just in the water, and it's not really even on purpose. But instead of feeling shame, like you said, instead of feeling ashamed about that, it's like, oh no, this is fascinating. It's actually fascinating to kind of look back at your former self and go, oh, you just really were, this was cringe. You were a bit cringe,
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
now I can never be redeemed. And I think that the Bouffon sort of synthesizes all of this into something that's like maybe even beyond redemption, because it might not even care about redemption, but it deeply cares about reality. It deeply cares though. Like the Bouffon
I
is
think
not
it's it.
apathetic.
I agree. I think if it is this and this comes out of Giovanni's stuff. You talk about the Buffon coming from the mist or from the dirt, from the mud, literally of and returns to, versus some other pedagogies, which is like it's the banished hunchback from the French Middle Ages or whatever, which I was never taught, nor does it really resonate with me. Means that, and again, I'm getting lessons from uh, from that lens, from that biomimicry and biology and earthiness. A flower, I would say, or a fruit, an entire purpose is to be as sweet and indulgent as possible, as bright and saturated as possible, to attract as much, to live its fullest life, to get the most sun, and then fade out. And I'm like, then that's the purpose. So if the Bouffons live their best lives, which is all they're trying to do, it's a pleasure-driven form. It's ecstasy incarnate in play. And they say, join us. We're all could be flowers in this gorgeous garden for this limited amount of time that we have. And the barriers that you put up, you cute little human, that you put up in the way of you and your full fucking pleasure, is adorbs. It's a really sad little game that you're actually not going to win. It's so funny, and that's the show. So I'm like, I live for that sort of lens, and that's what Bouffons keep teaching me, is to see the world in that way.
Mhm. Totally. Sabrina, so Natty's talking a bit about the origin, so maybe like the mythic origins of Bouffon, and some of which are sort of maybe ableist, like I don't resonate with the like Hunchback, but I also do think about like, yeah, maybe there was a festival of fools where like the lepers got to come back into the village or some nonsense, but it's still steeped in a power dynamic that is deeply problematic, right? It's like the power dynamic of like the Euro feudal caste system that we're still kind of living today, but we pretend we don't because we all have TVs or something. It's like, well, it's like, okay, sure, buddy. But the thing that I really enjoy, and which is why I want to bring it to you, Sabrina, because you just did a show that was a Bouffon show, that was a Bouffon character, but it was sourced from your ancestry and your heritage and the folklore of Eastern European sort of mythology, right? Or like Eastern European pre-pagan animism, or whatever you want to call it, like the old shit, the old earth shit, the earth shit, the like Black Madonna shit, the like the hags and the crones. And so this is where I started to see the Naked Empire, where kind of going more and more in the direction that I also was like, let's all go in this direction more, where we're digging up the skeletons in our closet and wearing them, but we're also dragging them up, like we're putting makeup on the skeleton. We're actually like showing how beautiful these old forms could be in their grotesqueness without necessarily needing it to be about the disability or the ugliness. It's not really about that. It's just part of it, right? And so I'm wondering if you can talk a bit, Sabrina, about how you came to that I need to be this character and I need to really go through this process, because I saw it online, and then you did it, you finally were able to do it like live, right? So you've had this maybe 2 years of being with this character. Yeah, it's good stuff. Tell me about it.
Years of this character. Yeah, I mean, a few things I think coincided to bring forth Baba Yaga as a character. I think like the previous show that I did was You Fucking Earned It with Kara, and also co-written with Natty. Like we all three worked on it. And there we had these characters, but they didn't really have names. They didn't speak so much from like a base kind of, character, like this base Bouffon. Like they were just kind of a base.
Yeah, I was like, they're like goblin smurfs.
Goblin smurfs. Yeah. They came out of nowhere, but they're here to like steal your stuff and give you a little show. But it wasn't like as much like it was like it was driven by character in a kind of different way. And in this one, it was very much like I want to peel into my heritage of being Polish, and a character that I grew up with as a young child was like Baba Yaga, and my mom would be like, you better go to bed or Baba Yaga will eat you. There's like fairy tales, like it was really little and subtle, and I didn't grow up in Poland, but it was like these little things that kind of like, I don't know, at least for me, like cemented a bit of my identity and culture for me while being here and far away from like family back there in Europe. And we were like very heavily discussing, like, we really don't want to go towards this, what Natty said, the minstrelsy of disability. It's like, I don't want to just be like, oh, I have this body, so therefore this is how I walk and that's my character. Like, I wanted something a little bit more driven from this folklore, like something that like is so innate to so many cultures and to humanness, to be like, this story has lived on for so long and it has different permutations, and yet there is a core being of this crone, this old woman, this wise woman. There's some wisdom there, and that just really like coincided with what we know of like the pedagogy of Bouffon that we like, which is like this wise character that does not give a fuck about humans.
That's the thing.
And yet like has something to say, but also like doesn't need to say it, like, but is gonna be in your business whether you like it or not, kind of like feeling. Yeah, and I think the other part is like we did have a grant from the city of San Francisco that also kind of asked us to lean into culture and identity in the projects that we were proposing. So that coupled with like I wanted to make a piece, and something that I was grappling with was like I guess the whole Trump election and the rise of white supremacy, more so than usual than the
Yeah.
usual white supremacy that the country's built on.
Yeah.
And that white women were kind of at the forefront of a lot of that. And for me, it was like I'd always distanced myself in certain ways from I didn't fully understand like the privileges that I had as a white woman in America versus like, but I was friends with like all first generation people of like so many different cultures, especially at Cal. It was like my friend group that I was like, oh yeah, all my people that are first generation, but like I was the only white person in that group. And then I was like, oh, but I also like didn't think about how I just like fit in with my whiteness to like everybody else. So like I don't stick out like they do. You know, it was like things like that that didn't really coalesce for me for a long time. So it made it very surprising to hear the like white woman statistics, to think that people were aligning themselves with whiteness versus like even like other parts of their identity, or just like that. Yeah, it was something that I was like all of a sudden like, oh, this is really serious and I want to make a show about it.
Yeah.
So then we're like, I guess Baba Yaga will be the vehicle for this storytelling.
Mhm.
So that's how How to Catch a Karen came to be. Plus there was like the word Karen, you know, came
Yeah,
to be such
it's
like
kind of
a part of
perfect.
our
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were kinds of the back. That's kind of the background that went into choosing Baba Yaga as the vehicle. And also we had an amazing costume designer, Lena Sands, who really brought it to life. We were like, here's a bunch of photos. We don't know. She could still have a humpback. Like that's okay. Like, because there's something like turtley about her, that she has
Yeah.
her home on her back or something. You know, it was like things like that that we kind of like, it pushed us to also describe to Lena, like, what are the things that we want? You know, we want warmness, but also like some sort of like slicing dagger ability at the same time. So it was like these cold blues along with like brown blankets and like an armadillo type armor on me, and with like weird
Yeah.
scaly punctury things on my
Right.
arms, but at the same time I kind of had like chicken legs, like long chicken legs with beautiful lace on it.
Yeah, totally.
uh so it
Yeah.
just had so many different like elements that also came from like animals and from like more of like feelings that we wanted to emanate, rather than like, oh, we'll just, I don't know, like sometimes at some of our workshops it was like, oh, just put something on and see what happens, which is a great way to have fun and explore.
Mhm.
But here we had to be a lot more intentional and a little bit more like, what is the thing that we are looking for here?
Right. And something about like she's very much of a place. She's very much of a place and time, even though she's kind of timeless now, of a place and time where people were really like the land-based arts and crafts and textiles and animal husbandry and everything. Like there's no separation from it. So there's no artificial things. There's no synthetic fabrics. There's no like even and so even magic is made of puppy dog
Real
tails.
stuff. Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
Yes.
made
Yep.
of like eyes of newts and it's like it's all very voodoo hoodoo. It's very much like what all cultures come from is like you can't outsource anything. You have to insource everything from your actual place, and that
Yep.
person does the weaving, and that it's all very, so you don't throw away blankets, you patch them up, like wow, and I think that bricolage kind of vibe where it's like I've got an armadillo pack and chicken legs and lace, and it's like yeah, because like in that world you have to put things together in this way. You can't just go to Walmart and be like, no, I want that outfit. It's like, no, 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 this is a hand me down. And that's the gift I got from the wolf,
Mhm,
like, and I'm going to integrate that. Like it's all this kind of
mhm,
chimeric. And if you look at old folklore, from any place in the world, you can kind of see the layers of sediment, to go back to this kind of boring quality. It's like there's a root story, and then
Yes.
every generation retells the root story, which gives it a new layer of sort of meaning and efficacy and agency in the world to be a real story that people would care about. And then if we look at that, we're actually seeing like a story that's made of stories, because that's how we
Yeah.
sort of do things. We weave it with a weft and the, all that stuff. And
It's a
I
great way
just
of putting it.
loved
Yeah.
the character, because I could instantly understand the power of this person's point of view, this being's point of view. Like, and for me, I'm the kind of person who goes, that's a evergreen character. That character doesn't die. You can't kill that character. Whereas like Goblin Smurf, yeah, whatever, that's like a thing we all have done, because like it's just useful as a kind of pastiche or something. But then something like Baba Yaga, or something like, a wolf character, or something like a raven character, you see those everywhere. So that's not like going away anytime soon. So
Right.
you can kind of use them, but also like ask for their help, and they sort of start to say, okay, so you can have this part of the game, and then you can do this part of the game, and I'll lend you some part of my power. And I feel like that is a real thing that happens, because, and I don't know, I want to hear from you, Sabrina, about this. Like, over the course of doing this Baba Yaga, did you start to find that like she was maybe like starting to take up more and more of like brain power? Like, oh, what would Baba Yaga say? Or like she just interrupts something and you're like, oh right, there's something here, because I've kind of stepped into the game, and now maybe I don't know how to step out of it. Like, is there anything like that for you, where it's like now she's actually just a part of your reality?
It's funny because like I don't know if I've like said this out loud, but like I can't stop being a Bouffon in general sometimes. Like I feel like I'm always a little fucking naysayer, like
Fucker.
fucker. Like if I can fuck around with people, I will. What, like with like friends.
Yeah.
But even like not with friends, sometimes I don't know. I'm a very like
Uh-oh.
strong boundary person too, where I'm like, what's happening here? No. So I think in certain ways, just doing Bouffon lends itself to that, and
Mhm.
like that part of my personality. So like the more I do it, and like the more I think in that kind of way sometimes. And in terms of Baba Yaga, definitely when I was like in it, building it, all of that. I mean, I guess there's two layers to that. The one layer was building the show, and in that layer, I feel like Bouffon shows are like the worst to create, because I am like stuck in these characters that, not Baba Yaga, but the other characters that I was trying to really pull out and develop, because I go into like 30 characters or something in one show. So it's not just all only being in that base. It's about like these other threads that are getting pulled out. And those characters I don't like. Like I don't like them. I'm doing them because I don't like what they're saying as a person, but I'm trying to highlight something. And it's also a part of me that I don't like. Like a lot of it's like also from my own experience or our experiences together creating it. So I'm not like, ooh, yay, I get to play this shitty ass professor that said these mean ass things to both me and my friends. Like that kind of stuff in the making of it was particularly hard, I would say, to drop in and let that go. Cause I think it's like, you can't help but kind of like be in that space sometimes a little too long. And then in terms of Baba Yaga, gosh, I would say specifically the second time around when I was like, okay, the show's kind of made, we're kind of fixing it to go on the stage. And I was like, oh my God, she's so great. She's got the answers. Got the answers. I would look to Natty and he'd be like, well, Baba Yaga would do this thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course she would. Yeah. That makes sense. Oh, now I'm happy. And then I was like, oh, now I'm happy again. I'm so happy because like she does have this purpose. She does have this purpose of being there to be like, yeah, you're gonna play those other little shitty little flies flying around. I'm gonna pull them in. We're gonna rip their little wings off and put them in the vat. It's like she's in charge of this. She's in charge of it. you don't have to worry when you're in Baba Yaga's hands in a certain way. So I would say like definitely the second time around and putting it on the stage was a little less like personally fraught for me, and a little more like trusting of this container, trusting of this thing, you know, hearing from you and others of like, she's an amazing archetype that we just kind of want to watch her. You know, it was like everything was so new and felt so out of my hands, out of my control at first, and then starting to kind of get that back. It was through Baba Yaga.
Yeah, great.
I remember rehearsals when we're in the weeds of it, playwriting, really play like rotting, and being a little like bummy because we're like can't figure out a transition, or can't figure out a moment, or can't predict how the audience is going to take this, or how the fuck do we justify that? And then we go, wait, Baba, like let's just play around for like 5 minutes as Baba Yaga, and we just discovered that she's like, fuck off. How about she just laughs and is like, ha, 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 that was weird, wasn't it? And just moves the fuck on. So or whatever, she had answers for us, and it felt a little woo-woo or seancey or something.
Sure.
Like we were like, if we create space
Yep.
for this deep human history to like live through this body that is Sabrina, we're gonna create access to newness, or something that wasn't when we efforted, we were squeezing out possibility. When
Right.
we opened up to access, our to become accessible, the spirit of this thing,
Totally.
this entity, started informing moments, and it became a lot more pleasurable, which of course is one of the foundations of this work in the first place. And I'm like, well, there it is.
Yeah.
God, we're
Yeah.
so dumb.
And it's beautiful because so I want to try to weave this into some other things. So when I came back up here to Portland, I had some to-do lists. I really was digging out my internal closet with a bunch of stuff I really had to sort of get over. And one of the things I did was I started to do a lot more ancestral research on like my history. You know, my dad's Afro-Puerto Rican, but he kind of ran away when I was young, and I didn't get to learn any Spanish or anything. So I was essentially raised like a white person, but all the time I'm hearing these voices of not white people being like, don't let them get you. Like, don't let them get you, like, don't, like they think you're white. Don't let them. And so I'm just this little kid being like, voice, hearing all these voices. And it wasn't until much later, maybe, and I'm talking, this shit sometimes takes decades to integrate, right? Like, because it's, you don't have access. But in doing cultural, anthropological, research, embodied research, ceremonial research, everything's research, ritual research, talking to people who had like gone to maybe like Caribbean cults and done mediumistic stuff, and like seeing like footage, it started to all come together because this stuff that you're saying is absolutely like a normal part of that world that has been denounced from white America. Whereas now in white America, the only people that are supposed to be able to do that are like Catholic priests, right? And like celebrities or something. And now we have like new age wackos who are just, whatever. But the point I'm saying is that if you go to these other countries, cultures that definitely have had to deal with the ongoing nature of colonialism, racism, colorism, poverty, like manufactured poverty, deliberate loss of history, like deliberate, like you can't speak your language, you have to change your name, like, and of course that has happened to the Native Americans on both of these continents too. But in some way, the mythoforms always found a way to adapt themselves, syncretically sometimes, to the colonizer religion. Mm-hmm. So like in Mexico, there's this like cult figure, Santa Muerte, Holy Death. And she's like not supposed to be a real saint because she's not like a legitimate saint. But she's this like second, third, fourth, fifth coming of this ancient Black Madonna mother who just sort of appears to those in need and wears the costumes of that particular era. And if you can actually, like, if you do enough research and you're open to the prayers and you're open to listening, you'll start to realize like, oh, this is not made up. This is actually like something comes out of the earth and appears to someone. Usually it's some old lady. And that old lady in a dream is like, I have to build a shrine. And then she builds a fucking shrine, and suddenly 20 years later, it's this like massive cult. And you're like, okay, but that's not a rare, like, if you really look at history, not just what we've been told, that's not a unique event. Like, it's all over the place that these creatures, these forces of nature that are sort of holy mother like figures, black women figures, they will appear and sort of morph themselves to the sort of situation that whatever the culture is, you know? And then there will become wildly elaborate, like essentially like drag channeling ceremonies around these pantheons where like in the Caribbean, there's like a whole like uh, essentially like a cocksucking ceremony for straight men. And you
Amazing.
have, and everyone's in like trance, and people are going batshit. Like people, you can see people are, they're like in,
Send
and
me a link. I need a video.
this
Oh,
is so Bouffon, it hurts because like they've taken away all the walls.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's literally no separation at all at this point. There's like a real mediumistic channel happening. People are becoming initiated, and they're doing it in a cultural container that allows them to become a better community after the fact, right? So it's all there. It's not
Gorgeous.
separated. It's not like this is theater and that's magic. It's like no. It's like theater, magic, seance, channeling, and it all
Nothing.
happens. And it's usually happening right under the noses of the police or the government or the religious
Yeah.
authorities. It's happening like right there. So it's like so subversive. It's like it's and they lie about it and they say it's something else, and it's like, you know, and everyone
Yeah, yeah,
kind
yeah.
of like looks the other way, and it's just like super interesting that this stuff is happening in these ways. And in some way, I feel like what Bouffon is it's trying to sort of retitrate that back into an American culture that can't, it's like it doesn't want to deal with what we're talking about. It's too messy. It's too like, oh, there's too much shit happening at once. Um, and for me, it was actually a great relief to be like, oh, it's only in America that you have to like hyper segment yourself. In these other cultures, oh yeah, that's the musician who's also the priest who does the exorcisms, but also is like doing this other thing
Yeah.
and like paints sometimes and like brings has the best tomato bouillabaisse or something. It's like, you know, like there's no, it's there's a lot more like everyone's 15 people, everyone's
Yeah.
like 1,000 people, and they're all just kind of, you know, milling around. And I say all that because I would love it if you, Natty, talked about your recent show, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you're touching on so much of what influenced the aesthetics and the content and the reason for it to exist. It's called The Most Important Place in the World, and is a, we call it this fantasia, this satirical roller coaster indictment of the colonial project between the United States and Puerto Rico. And I was specifically interested in how could I indict, skewer myself, of course, and included in that is whatever audience I'm going to have in mainland U.S. and which are going to be predominantly white and predominantly progressive or self-identified as progressive, etc. Um, and to also include that unique but constantly invisibilized experience of being part of the diaspora. So how am I going to do that? Because there's plenty, there is a good and rich discourse around what's happening on the island right now. And having never been on it, not speaking fluent Spanish, I felt like it wasn't right, nor did I have the juice, the the resonance enough, the lived experience to speak honestly and authentically about, well, the island experience. So we started building content about the historical and current issues, and how does say a Boston audience, where it first went up, contribute actively to harm and the suffering, or the continuation, the perpetuation of colonialism. That was the big question of it. Amidst all of that, and touching on so much of what you're saying, is how the Bouffons themselves could and should be manifestations of like pre, post colonial project, anti, subversive, untouched by it, or somehow using it and reforming itself to thrive and find itself reintegrated. Because when I had to, you named it, when we were studying about like what is the colonial project, if I had to say what colonialism is versus so many of the other isms, one of its primary dynamics is the bento box, is the separating. I want to put things in categories, and then there's this byproduct or waste that needs to get thrown away because it doesn't fit in any of the boxes. But that's what we're going to be doing, and that is the colonial project, the organizing. And then we're going to need to refill these trays, so we're going to need more of that. And so over time, we're going to get rid of fluidity of identity. You're going to belong to these two and those three and that thing and that job and that level and that. We need to call this something. What do we call this, y'all? What do we call this? Because that's the new name. And then we move on, right? So colonialism. And so I was on this hunt for, what if I broke the little walls between each of those items? What if we break that? So we start to fuck around with gender and sexuality, and we also like enjoy what that dynamic is. And then we realize that that's like deep in our Ricanness, was this spine that moved, was the water itself, was the sonic nature of and joy in our bodies. And we're like, oh, this is like deep in us, that profound joy. And then we realized, just like with Baba Yaga, that these entities that we ended up creating to create the show are like deeply anti or pre-colonial earth / object refabrication things, and are essentially like at the center of the Bouffon theory. They're again, we're like, oh, there it is again. Like Bouffon itself is an anti-form. It says, oh, you're doing form again. That's so cute. Okay, I'm gonna make a game out of your little theater. Oh, cute. Oh, I'm doing theater at 8:00 on a Saturday. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck about 8:00. They never do. So how do we do that? And so that's just one piece of what contributed to things like them being these blue tarp creatures, which comes from that provocation from Giovanni and from Marisol, who was my co-creator of blue tarps, ended up becoming this sign of both resilience and poverty and struggle and thriving on the island post hurricane, and whenever resources weren't available. And it also has all this fucking strength. It has this blue. We create water. We create puppetry out of it. We create wind out of it. We actually flapped people in their faces. We could spin and create hurricanes in a circular space. Hurricane, the word, is a Taino fucking reference to a goddess of the hurricane. It was embraced. Not that it was like, yes, please destroy everything, but like, we know, and we can't fight it. So what if we actually use it like any kind of rebuilding, like fire that makes fertile again, those kinds of practices, etc. So that's what these creatures became, and they became also in tune with the rhythms, the fluidity, the whoosh of wind, and the splash of water, and that's what became who they were.
Right. And so we both, like, with both How to Catch a Karen with Baba Yaga and Most Important Place in the World, with these sort of like semis in a way, like they're kind of like these totemic semis brought to life. You still have this thing where it's like, it's Bouffon for sure, and maybe we can't name all the reasons why we know it's Bouffon, and yet for me, when you see it, it's both completely new and completely obvious at the same time. Like, oh, of course, this is a land-based, place-based storytelling embodiment. Like, you have to do like a multi-hyphenate word. You have to
Yep.
basically have like a crazy, like, new phraseology that is essentially 400 different words that are all hyphenated to be like, oh, that's what that is, because that's what that is. Like, where did all the forms come from to get these little things? Well, they came from the thing that was all those things originally, like the latency of it, and then they've become all these things. But I love the fact that like the Bouffon form, and we'll just wrap up here in a second because I could talk forever. But and I just love both of you and the work.
Same.
Fucking great, you know. Like, and for me, there is like this dichotomous tantra with Bouffon where you're liberating a lot of energy. You're liberating all this energy from essentially breaking down barriers and transgression, literally, like transgressing and taboo play and stuff like that. And yet, at the same time that you're liberating all of this energy, you're not devolving into a kind of meaningless Westernist postmodernism. Like, there's still a kind of rooted form in this non-form that shows up as a kind of powerful entity. Like, it is the same feeling you get when you do like a medicine ceremony and you're in the dark and you realize you're not alone in the dark. Like, there's this feeling where like, yes, so darkness and all this potential, but there's this moment of like delightful terror that I have experienced on multiple times. And, you know, this happens in meditation, this happens doing, you know, entheogens. It just happens because it's sort of like a primary nature of reality, which is like, for a moment you feel alone and then you realize you're not. And for me, the Bouffon is like living in this kind of strange mirror of like, I'm totally free and alone and can do whatever the fuck I want. And then there's a moment of like looking up slowly, like in a cartoon where you're like, and like one giant eyeball like blinks or something, you know, but you thought it was the moon or something, you know, and it sort of like blinks and you're like, oh shit, I'm actually like a tiny termite in this ancient story that has been going on for bajillions of eons, and I thought I was the main character. And in some way, the Bouffon is like almost cultivating this in the audience, and for myself as the performer, cultivating this sense of like, I'm totally fucking in charge. I'm super, like, I'm in charge. I know what's going on. Baba Yaga, hurricanes. Yeah. And then the moment where everyone kind of feels like they're not alone anymore and they're being watched by something far older and wiser than them, and the Bouffon sort of cracks a little bit more because that was just another fake like that was also a trick, you know, like this confident steak oil salesman is like, that's also a kind of a lie. And the same way that these folkloric stories, the more you peel them backwards, the more you kind of lose track of linearity. You lose track of time in a way that's like so like really surrealistic. Like, what were the surrealists in South America really pulling at back then? They were pulling from this too, I think, this ability that the dreaming has when you're walking on the land half starved and you see something and it tells you something and it turns out to be true. You know, like, where's this shit coming from? And I do feel that the Bouffon is sort of like, it is a fool in the sense of the fool we often think of as the fool, but it's so much more implicated in a certain way than what we consider clowning or fooling to be, I think, in this culture. And I'd like to sort of end with just a little thought experiment, which is like, where do you think this form is dragging you kicking and screaming to?
Like, are you implying resistance?
I'm implying like some part of us might resist and not even know we're resisting. At the same time that we might enjoy it, but I have this, this sense that like the Bouffon dredges up these like dead bodies that we don't want to see anymore.
Yeah.
And yet that's what we're doing. Do you think it has something to do like so, and this might just be like a to be continued, but do you think it has something to do with how hard it is to teach this work to like regular people? Like to people like like we all get it and we all have sort of been infected. Like we understand the power and the joy. But when I try to talk about this with like people,
People.
like people,
Oh yeah. No,
like
I hear that.
Normies.
it's like
Yeah.
it's like I try to reference things they already know. I'm like, yeah, like Looney Tunes, like Bugs Bunny's kind of like a Bouffon. Like they're, Wile E. Coyote's like kind of dies all the time, like it's kind of creepy, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I
but
like
I just,
Roger
But
from
people
Family
can't
Guy.
see past the surface sometimes. Like they're not ready to, or like they can't. I don't know. I guess, Dare, what you bring up around like you have like a death practice and thinking about death as a meditation. And I do think that like the Bouffon does bring in death. Like I think the thing that wasn't in my show, that I specifically didn't want to be in my show about like racism in America, is the amount of death and harm and literal trauma
yeah,
and the hopelessness of that, and how many people are affected and how many people wear that every single day and have to go out and aren't necessarily, they're not helped by my show.
right, right,
Some people watched it with tears in their eyes. That's not something I wanted to put on stage.
right.
But it is what, that was like part of the impetus to put it on stage.
Right. It's in the back. It's like it's informing it. It's like deeply informing. Like,
Yeah.
but you're like, but I can't show it because like the audience actually doesn't have the preparation maybe to like take it in a way that wouldn't be either re-traumatizing or some kind of psychotic break or something, or like
Yep.
I'm the wrong person to say this. Right. Like I often think about that too. It's like I want to see so many more like black Bouffons, like people with just dark skin
Yeah.
doing Bouffon work, because I think that in some way it's absolutely necessary to have like a
Yes.
mixed race coalition, mixed gender coalition doing this kind of work in an ensemble. It like, to me, there's like the next level is like, can we get enough different varieties of people who have all sort of tasted the fruit of Bouffon and go, this is it. It's super hot. You could burn yourself very easily.
Yes.
This is hot. This is not something you can just toss to a child. And can we make the work from that kind of ensemble place where everyone kind of knows how to sort of not get burned by the fire or use the fire correctly with each other and check in with each other. So for me, I think about that a lot. Like Bouffon isn't quite Bouffon until there's a mob, and the mob has to be a real mob that is like diverse. It has to, and I think that's very hard in theater, and especially like
It's
even
hard
in
in
like
these kind of
in
comedic and physical theater
right,
forms.
it's so,
Be
and
very
even in like Western improv,
narrow,
like I'll
right?
go to
Yeah.
a sort of like various an improv show, and there's like two black people in the
Yeah.
whole room, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, so there's a big issue here. There's like a
Right.
unseen monster in the room, and I don't have an answer for it, but I know that the form can absorb it, and I know that the form kind of wants it,
Yeah.
but I just, as like a person in this culture, am just so very curious as to how you can be an ambassador for an art form that is so, in some way repulsive to so many people right off the bat, because it's just like, oh no, I can't even, it's just a big question I have, it's like a pedagogical question. And I don't think people like Giovanni are the people that can teach this level of the work on
aspect
some,
of
you
it.
know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like it's like,
I do. I think there's several steps, and just to respond sort of briefly to that
yeah,
notion, and this is again in the works, and also you're describing the mandate for Naked Empire's next show, which is a hopefully a group of 5 with a maximum of 1 white cast member, about violence and specifically around guns in this country, but etc. But I think making a sort of purposeful and intentional and invitational space for the training, yada yada. Um, uh, and I think I agree with you on the idea of the ensemble making a space of profound like support. Um, I yeah.
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's okay. It's
It's
okay.
no, it's a journey, and I think when folks I think experience that heat. I'm thinking about audiences right now. Uh, it will have such a. I think. Well, I think about our progressive white audience, honestly, audiences specifically, who will see, melanated bodies on stage with like as if they were in a state of ecstasy.
Yeah.
Um, and also like it's almost as if I keep making this face as if we're all just took a bite out of like fucking phenomenal fruit, and we're like,
Yeah.
and it's them, we're chewing them, like it's
Yeah.
your bullshit that we're eating, and it's so delicious. It's
Yeah.
so delicious. Look at you. You have no idea. I just took that's your heart.
Yeah.
So that's the show that I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that words fail us at this, and at the crossroads I'm looking at in terms of the work, you have to do the actions, and only in hindsight can we find the words. I think we're at this place in the work where that just is like you at the crossroads in the middle of the night and you do the ritual, and now it's that moment where you're like kind of fucked because you've kind of done all the things,
Mm.
and now you have to wait for something to happen to you. You've done all your work and you've gone, and I do feel like, Bouffon is in some way like just a pagan ritual. And when you fling open those fucking doors to the other world, um, you are at a loss for words. Like you can't necessarily explain it from this side of the doorway, this side of the threshold. And but I have that heart rending joy inside my heart, even just like posing the question with
Yeah.
both of you is like, there's like a heartbreaking joy of like, I know what this work can do, and it will kill you. It's like, it is a death. It is a kind of murderous ecstasy, because that's actually the level we've gotten to in the culture, like we've gotten to a level of like, the trouble is so troubling
Yeah.
that
You're
like
reminding me, yeah,
yeah.
Giovanni. I was like, Giovanni, I love this so much. Why aren't there like tons of Buffon companies? And he says, Natty, if there was more Buffon in the world, people would have to walk into the middle of the street and cry themselves to death, just like cry and die on the street. And he does like he says, like he was looking around, we were having lunch, he says this little Doritos bag, and he goes like, do you know that 1 out of every 3 calories can be linked back to the oil economy? Like there's like it's in your shirt. He starts touching me, and he's like everywhere. The Buffons would say all of this needs to fall apart. We are living in dark times. That I'm like, okay. So the context for this is always a profound pain and horror, and the Buffons are like, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
oh, you're cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it's just to respect everyone's time, we're gonna wrap up. But I love that we ended on like the real thing, which is like, it's horrifying. Like the work is the material that you work with, the clay of the work is kind
Yeah.
of horror.
Yeah.
And yet the skills of the Bouffon turn that horror into something else, question mark, Potentially, who fucking knows? But yeah, I'm super, like, these are the kinds of conversations that I'm just like really yearning for, because I think, we're really pushing on all of the things we don't yet know. We're really pushing on how hard it is to do this kind of work and this kind of thinking. So I just want to thank you both for coming on and shooting the shit with me for a little while. And I hope we get to do another one. I hope in the future that if there is a
Pleasure.
future, it
Right.
all doesn't burn down, whatever tomorrow. But I will take all the info after this, and it'll be all up on the webs, and then people will be able to see. And I know, Natty, you're doing a bunch of Canadian workshops, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. Like, I'm super stoked for that work to keep happening. And Sabrina, if you're doing anything, please let me know, and we'll put that up, and so people can see it. And is there anything either of you would like to say just to sort of close off the conversation?
I'll just say thank you. This is great. I love geeking out on this shit. This is my life's work, and I love it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dare, and good to see you, Natty.
Hi, Sabrina.
Yeah, it's fun to like get back in touch with like, oh yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, this is fun. This is fun. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you all so much. To be continued. Dun,
Cheers.
dun, dun. Ominously to be continued.